Robb Wolf, welcome to the Meat Mafia podcast. It is a pleasure to have you. We are very excited to dive in here, and thanks for joining us this morning.
I'm honored to bring down property values anywhere folks are foolish enough to let me in. So thank you.
And this is a special exception this episode because we were going back and forth on Twitter. We said normally we do a baptism by bone broth, but for you, we're going to make an exception, baptism by element, obviously, or we could do both. So
let's just put element in some good quality bone broth, and then we've ticked all the boxes.
Ooh, that could be good. Would you go unflavored if you're going to throw element in the bone broth?
If I had a really good bone broth, I would probably do like the lemon habanero and put a little spicy twang to the whole deal. But yeah.
That's one of those flavors I'm still trying to figure out, because I the first time I tried it, it's so different than all the flavors. But I'm like, I kind of love this. It's a nice little curveball.
It is, and I mean, if you're doing any type of a dinner party or something, you want either cocktails or mocktails. That's where those things shine, because like if somebody doesn't want to have some booze, but they want something a little different, like the fact it is like hot, like you don't want to open those things on an airplane. Like you're gonna hotbox everybody on the airplane with the overflow from it. But there've been points where I want to go hang out with folks and I just don't really want some booze that night, and the lemon habanero or the mango chili, the fact it's got a little heat and a little something different to it, like I kind of feel like I've got something naughty in my hands, so right. It's a little more enjoyable. And then if you actually do want to put like some tequila or something like that in it and use it as a drink base, they're kind of phenomenal. I mean, we've been really lucky. We've had great growth. Everything's gone well, but I was kind of like, really, salt? Like, is there a place for like another electrolyte product in this world, But when we were spinning these things up, we tinkered a lot with them as drink bases, it was kind of mixed drink bases. And if the electrolyte thing failed, we were going to pivot and like really go hard into the paint on like, hey, this is a great drink base, and fortunately we can kind of do both now. So, yeah.
Well, I feel like I remember, I don't know if it was like 10 years ago or close to that, you used to have a blog post where it was like, if you want to make your homemade version of Gatorade without all the sugar and carbs, I remember you used to post your recipe and people obviously went crazy for it. So it sounds like it all worked itself out into Element.
Yeah. I mean, I got that from Tyler and Luis from Keto Games. Like they were much more savvy to this stuff before me. And when we posted that thing, which we called it Keto Aid, we didn't have it tied to like an email marketing thing. We weren't collecting emails. It wasn't tied to like a product. It was just, hey, if everybody needs more electrolytes. If you're on a low carb diet, you really need more electrolytes, specifically sodium. Here's a great way to do it. And after we posted that thing, like 6 months later, we had 500,000 downloads of it.
Wow.
And which was awesome. And then what started happening is the folks that were downloading that and getting all this benefit, they're like, this is awesome. Like I sleep better, my HRV score is better, my recovery's better. But when I travel, having 3 bags of white powder really sucks. Like TSA does not think that that's very cool. Could you guys do some sort of a convenience deal? And that was really the whole impetus for this whole business. Like we did not sit down and say, oh, we're just going to spin up this salt company. It was me realizing that I was super deficient in sodium and electrolytes broadly. And that's where I was like, well, we need to tell everybody about this when I figured this stuff out. And that's where the idea of the like freemium Keto Aid thing came from. And kind of the cool thing now is that is the genesis of the business. And so when people are like, well, I think your product's too expensive, and we're like, awesome, we have a free version of it. Whatever commodity price you can get, salt, stevia, lemon juice, you could make a gallon of it for a penny if you can get the raw materials cheap enough. So it's kind of cool. It's almost like software in that regard, where you've got a free version and a premium version, and you pick which one you want. Yeah.
Well, I think that does a great job of explaining like where you've gotten to now. Element is really like your baby, this product that you've gotten out there. But I think it'd be really helpful to set the stage a little bit and maybe start back in when you were really getting into the paleo movement, because, you know, for our audience's benefit, you are one of the founding fathers of the paleo movement and really helped to promote that. And we know, like Brett, you cured your ulcerative colitis through a paleo-based diet. So maybe just giving a little context around your health story and how that grew into everything that you're doing now. I think that would be amazing.
Sure. I've always been interested in health and human performance. I was a California State Powerlifting Champion a very, very long time ago, competed as a teenager. Both my parents, unfortunately, were pretty unhealthy. Both my parents smoked. My dad drank. Both of them ended up with type 2 diabetes in their mid 30s, early 40s, you know. So I just turned 50, and I remember when my dad turned 50, he seemed old. I mean, like old. And granted, I'm really fortunate I've been able to live a life that my dad couldn't live, you know, just information access and you know, all kinds of stuff, and not smoking and not drinking a lot and stuff like that. So, but you know, being curious about diet, I went down this vegetarian and then eventually vegan approach to eating. And this was mid to early 90s. And for me, it was a terrible move. Like, I just got progressively more and more sick. When I was competing in powerlifting, I was about 181 pounds at kind of my good fighting weight. I'm about 165 right now. But my ulcerative colitis got so bad, I was down to about 125, 130 pounds. So if you imagine, I'm not a big dude. I'm 5'9", 165 pounds. If you imagine 40 pounds less of me here, like, I was a wreck. My hair was falling out, nails falling out, horrible racking depression. And I mean, you know, from the gut issues, it's I think the only thing on par with really having terrible gut issues is like back pain. Like, if you've ever, because there's just no escape and you have to eat. You know, when you have terrible back pain, like if you sneeze, when you try to take a shit, when you stand, when you sit, like it's just there all the time. You know, it's inescapable. And really gnarly gut issues, it's like, if you get excited, they get worse. If you get depressed, they get worse. It's like almost nothing helps with it. And it's kind of this constant assailed, you know, state that you're in. And it was really kind of a moment of desperation that I was talking to my mom on the phone, and she had had a lifetime of similar issues. And I still have never fully unpacked the story, but her rheumatologist did some really extensive testing on her, and he figured out that she had celiac disease, in addition to like 8 interrelated autoimmune conditions. But he basically said to my mom, he said, "You are reactive to grains, legumes, and dairy." And so my mom told me this, and this was like 1997, 1998. I was like, grains, legumes, and dairy. I was vegan at the time, so I was kind of like, okay, I get it, no dairy, but no grains and legumes. Like, what on earth do you eat if you don't eat grains and legumes, you know? And I was sitting there thinking about it, and I don't know where I had heard this term, because again, this is 1998. I into my head popped this term, Paleolithic diet. And it was like, you know, the way that hunter-gatherers ate. And I, since a kid, have always been fascinated with evolutionary biology. I had read the Selfish Gene by Dawkins, and you're really pretty interested in evolutionary biology. I had an undergrad in biochemistry, so it was kind of part of my training. But I was like, because, you know, grains and legumes, so that's agriculture, and what we ate before agriculture was this Paleolithic diet. And I was like, I wonder if there's anything to that. So went into the house, turned on the computer, waited for the computer to do its whole weird booting up thing. And then this was dial-up, so you wait for the dial-up thing to do its gig. And finally, when I got online, again, 1998, there was this brand new search engine called Google. And into Google, I put the term Paleolithic diet. And there wasn't a lot that was there, but there was a little bit. And there were 2 main guys, Lauren Cordain and this guy, Arthur Devaney. Lauren is a researcher out of Colorado State University. He's retired now. And he had found the work of Boyd Eaton, who's an MD, a radiologist. And Boyd, during the late 80s, early 90s, wrote a book called The Paleolithic Prescription, where he talked about basically a Paleolithic diet and pulled information from what's called the Ethnographic Atlas, which is this giant compendium of different pre-Westernized cultures, both hunter-gatherer, agriculturalist, pastoralist. And it looked into it and kind of analyzed what was the amounts and types of foods that folks ate and kind of what was their health status and whatnot. And both Boyd and Lauren made this case that hunter-gatherers, despite having effectively little or no modern medical interventions, if they lived to early adulthood, they were as likely to live into it as we are. There's a very high infant mortality rate with different diseases like that, but if they made it to like 15, they were as likely to make it to 80 as we are, which was really kind of fascinating. And what was interesting about that, their 80-year-old person is way different than our 80-year-old person. Like they typically had full cognitive faculties. They were diminished in physical stature and strength, but they weren't like overtly frail. They generally care for themselves and stuff like that. It's got a way different health and lifespan with all this stuff. And this was all intriguing, but the main things that I found in the reading that was very limited at that time, it talked a lot about gut and autoimmune issues due to these Neolithic foods, these evolutionarily novel foods that have different anti-predation chemicals in them that disrupt elements of digestion. Celiac is a great example where the gliadin and gluten proteins actually foster an autoimmune response in certain people. So I was so sick that I was like, I have nothing to lose here, And so the closest thing, though, that I wanted a book to read so that I had some guideline to just some lane lines to follow, And funny enough, within the very small community online that was like paleo at that time, and I around 1998, there were probably 1,000 people on the planet that knew what the term Paleolithic diet was. I mean, wow. And people may, I don't know about that, but I co-founded the first and fourth CrossFit affiliate gyms too. There was a time when there were 5 people that knew about CrossFit, and then 50, and then 100, and then 1,000. So there was a time where all of this stuff was literally brand spanking new, and so there was very little in regards to paleo diet materials, and what folks in those circles recommended was an Atkins book. And so I went and picked up an Atkins book. And one thing about that is it's very weight loss oriented, but it talked about depression, it talked about gut issues, it talked about autoimmune disease. Like Atkins really deserves a lot more credit for the work that he did. Like when he got people eating this lower carb diet, when you're really digging into a lower carb diet, you could have the slice of toast and get 20 grams of carbs, or you could have like a pretty good whack of like watermelon or berries, or, you start looking at this, like, that toast looks kind of like shit, compared to the bowl of berries or, whatever else I'm going to eat. So just naturally, people ended up kind of lower glycemic load, lower gluten exposure, and they noticed all kinds of like gut and autoimmune conditions resolving. So my first meal off of veganism was a rack of beef ribs that I slow cooked in the oven for like 8 hours. And I had some cantaloupe that was ripe and good. And I ate that. And I swear to God, I didn't even get out of the chair I was sitting in. I fell asleep in that chair because I was so sick. I had this weird TMJ thing going on where like I was practically grinding my teeth down to powder. Sleep was super disturbed. Probably should have been hospitalized for the degree of depression that I had. I'll share this. I've never shared this publicly, so you guys will get a scoop on this. Contemplated suicide, and the way I was going to suicide myself was a meat cleaver to the hand. Like, no shit.
Wow.
It was just more gnarly than what I was prepared to do. Had I actually had a firearm at the time, I might have been more successful in that direction. So maybe that was a good thing I didn't at that time. I mean, I was sick, and I ate this meal of slow cooked beef ribs and some fruit, and I literally passed out in the chair, like as if I had done, a college bender. And I woke up like 13 hours later And it was the first morning that I kind of woke up and didn't feel nearly as tired as when I went to sleep. And I was like, I actually feel kind of good. And there was some of the beef ribs still literally left on the stove. And I'm like, oh, I'll have some more of that, you know. And that was the beginning of this process. And people ask, you know, did you have any problem transitioning from vegan diet to eating meat? I didn't. I do think I've had hypochlorhydria, low stomach acid at various points, but that didn't really interrupt my success with eating meat products, although I've supplemented with like betaine hydrochloride and some apple cider vinegar tablets and stuff like that at various points to kind of supplement my diet. But yeah, that was that transition. At that time, maybe it's worth mentioning, I was looking at either medical school or a research biochemistry track. I was working in cancer research at that time, and what this experience told me was that I didn't want to go to regular medical school, because this thing put the paleo diet concept on my radar, which maybe 6 months after this, the whole circadian biology thing got on my radar. So we're talking like 1999, 2000, I started really going deep on circadian biology and the gut microbiome and everything. I was like, there's no way I can do regular medical school and spend another 8 years of dealing with basically trauma and acute life-threatening disease to finally get out the end and then do the type of medicine that I would be interested in, which is this preventative lifestyle type stuff. So I really wasn't too sure what I was going to do. But one thing that I did do was, on my employer's dime, I would search, I would get my reactions going while doing chemistry, and to go search, interesting exercise and workout stuff. And I found this weird workout online called CrossFit. And this was 2000, 2001. And I started doing this CrossFit workout of the day with my friend Dave Warner, who's a retired Navy SEAL. And we started working out together, and then we converted his garage into a gym. And within, I don't know, 3-4 months, we had like 15 people that were training with us. And I reached out to Greg and Lauren Glassman, the founders of CrossFit. And I'm like, hey, we love what you're doing. We want to open a gym. We want to call it CrossFit. Can we do that? And they were like, yes, go be Achieve. And that was the first CrossFit affiliate gym in the world, CrossFit North. And then I had a chance to move back down to Chico, California, and open what was then the fourth CrossFit affiliate gym, NorCal Strength and Conditioning, CrossFit NorCal. And I worked with CrossFit for close to 10 years and got to work with all kinds of elite athletes, SEALs. I worked for the Naval Special Warfare Resiliency Program for about 6 years, where I went and spoke to the SEAL teams, the special boat teams, and their families about sleep, circadian biology, food, caffeine, nicotine, the whole gamut of health issues. And all of that was really cool. But the kind of the center of the bullseye for me, as far as people to work with, are folks like me who had complex gut, autoimmune, and metabolic issues. Like, I have been the toughest nut to crack. Like, had I figured all my health issues out in 1998, 2000, I might not be doing this. I might have gone on and done something else. But my shit has been so frustratingly difficult to figure out. That everybody else, I wouldn't say it's easy, but I'm like, I got a pretty good idea what you've got going on, because like, I'm so fucked up that I'm like, I'm like, I am all of the Venn diagrams. It's like, oh, metabolic issues, iron overload, it's like, I got it all. And so 9 times out of 10, if somebody has some issues, I'm like, oh, dude, you're only a little pie wedge of what I've got going on. You're a piece of cake.
Yeah.
Happening. And so we opened our gym, and it's worth mentioning, like, we were open as a CrossFit affiliate gym, I want to say 5 years before we ever had a contract or anything. Like, it really was the Wild West there for a long time in that scene. But it allowed me to work with the type of people that I really wanted to work with, and in an environment that is just kind of second to none if you really want to help people. Like, if you're going to your doctor 5 days a week, 3 to 5 days a week, like, something is really seriously sideways or wrong, but it's pretty reasonable for you to go to your trainer, go to your gym 3 to 5 days a week, And so it was such a cool environment for being able to bend people's ears about health. And it was cool too, because the performance orientation of CrossFit, although I think it's got some downsides, like when you write a person's name on the board and you have a workout, they will kill themselves to not come in last. And there's good and bad elements to that. Like people can over train on that. But the kind of cool thing about it is that I never saw women, athletes in particular, do any type of disordered eating, because if they skipped meals, if they were under eating, they went from top of the leaderboard to the bottom in like a day. And once or twice I had like really hard charging female athletes that were killing it. And then for like a week, they were like bottom of the barrel. And I would ask them, I'm like, what are you doing? Throwing up after I eat, I'm skipping meals. Well, why are you doing that? Well, I want to get leaner. Well, let's play with that, but let's not do this, because do you want to kick Sally's ass or do you want Sally kicking your ass? And they're like, fuck Sally. Like, so CrossFit was really cool in that regard. Like, I think it has a tendency to not foster disordered eating the way that just purely aesthetics-based stuff can. And now I'm just wondering like a blithering old man, but like that's kind of my big genesis story. Like that's kind of broadly 23 years of being in the trenches doing this stuff.
That's such a good overview. And Rob, were you finding like in those early years with CrossFit that athletes were coming to you for nutritional advice? You're speaking to this Paleolithic approach that worked for you, and they were also realizing the benefits of it as well. Is that how this whole thing kind of got started?
I lost you for a second. Sorry.
No, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. No, I was going to say, did this whole thing get started where like the first couple of years of the first CrossFit gym, athletes were coming to you for nutritional advice? You're teaching them about the Paleolithic approach. And then are they starting to realize some of these benefits as well? And you're thinking to yourself, all right, maybe we have something here, because a lot of people are realizing benefits from this.
Yeah, and I mean, nobody. One thing is you have to put the context on this. There were no CrossFit athletes. Like the games didn't happen until like 2008, and so there's this whole nearly 10-year period of CrossFit absent the games, which is just mind-blowing for people to think about. There was nearly a decade of developing this stuff absent the games. What happened is folks would, so like we had a client who older woman, she was early 60s, I think, when she came in. And Chico is a pretty hot environment in the summer. Like it'll get 115, 120 sometimes, a little bit humid too. So kind of a gnarly environment. And this gal, Kate, she always had like a big brimmed hat, long sleeve shirt, and gloves on. And Nikki and I were just kind of like, don't know what the deal is with that. She probably one of these people that are afraid of the sun, afraid of skin cancer and everything. But one day I was like, Paula, what's the deal? Like it's 100 degrees out. What do you have going on here? And she's like, I have porphyria cutanea tarda. And I stopped and I took a step back. I'm like, is this transmissible? And she's like, no. I'm like, okay, what is this? And she said, it is a condition where when she gets exposed to the sun, she gets a burn all the way down to the periosteum of the bone. Like imagine like when vampires in movies get exposed to sunlight. And so I did some research, and what I tend to do is if somebody has a condition I haven't heard of, I will put in the condition name and then insulin resistance. And about 50% of the time I get a return. And if I don't get a return on that, I will put in the condition name and then autoimmunity. And if it's not insulin resistance, it's autoimmunity, like guaranteed every single time. And so porphyria is this autoimmune condition where when folks get exposed to sunlight, they get this super ramped up response where they get superoxide molecules that are being produced. And normally superoxide molecules are what are used to kill bacteria and viruses, but you want them very, very tightly controlled. Otherwise they can burn you all the way down to the bone. So it's not really the sunlight that's hurting you. It's the immune response to the sunlight that ends up causing these problems. So I went back to Paula. I'm like, hey, Paula, I think that your porphyria is caused by bread, by gluten. And she's like, well, I love bread. And I'm like, I love bread too, but I think this thing's giving you all these problems. And so she's 60 years old. She learned about this in her early 40s, late 30s, early 40s. So she spent 20 odd years like under a big brimmed hat and long sleeve shirt, not out in the sun. And I'm like, hey, why don't we just do an experiment for 30 days and pull the bread out and see how you do? And she pulled all gluten items out. And it was maybe 2 weeks. She showed up at the gym with a tank top on and no hat. She's like, I have no problems now. And she was out playing with her grandkids after that, and you know, totally fine. And we were picked as one of Men's Health top 30 gyms in America. This was like 2004, 2006, something like that. So NorCal opened in 2004. So it must have been 2006, 2007 that happened. But I was pretty cocky for a while, you know, because it's like there was all this weird stuff that folks had, like Paula's porphyria condition, and you know, getting acknowledged by Men's Health. We eventually did have people that would travel to Chico to work with us, mainly around health related stuff. But this is still very, and it was due to CrossFit, but people, the idea of being like a CrossFit athlete was still 5 years in the future. Like people there wasn't a box for that. Like we were still in this spot where the workouts were a means to an end, not the end unto themselves, you know, just to do like the CrossFit Games. Yeah.
Rob, how much of these experiences that you had with CrossFit, your own personal health journey, led you into starting to write? Because I think we'd be remiss to not talk about the books that you've written, because I think that they've had such a wide scope in you know, talking about different health topics, from the food system to personal health. Were these things that were happening in your life? Did that fuel you writing the book?
Absolutely. And, you know, it's a really good question. And maybe, you know, for people entering this space, like how do you get going? What do you do there? I just started answering questions of folks. Like there was the CrossFit message board. And what was interesting, there were kind of two worlds there. There was the front page at that time where the workout of the day was posted, and everybody really geeked out about how good or bad they did on the workout. And then, which I wasn't that interested in. Like I would pop in there a little bit, but there was this world very focused on that. And that's where Greg Glassman spent the bulk of his time. And then there was the message board where we talked about nutrition and like training theory and, you know, all this other stuff. And I just answered a shitload of questions. And part of it, and just tried to be helpful. And I wasn't making any money off this stuff, but like I learned an enormous amount, and I gained a lot of trust of people. You know, I learned debate skills and how to, you know, persuasion and, you know, readiness for change and all these different things. But I started off in that spot of answering questions, and then I started my own website in 2007, I guess, just robbwolf.com. And again, answering questions, and I started doing the CrossFit nutrition cert stuff around 2008. Had a big blow up with CrossFit 2009, and kind of exited from being formally involved with those guys. But what happened in that time is I was just getting a landslide of questions. And so how do I deal with all this stuff? Because a lot of the questions were repetitive, you know, and so I didn't want to repeat the email response. And this was still at a time when you would do a blog post and you would get 200-300 comments on your blog post. So, you know, a little bit of a different world. So that's where I had the idea of doing the podcast. I was pretty early to the scene doing the podcast, because I could reach a lot more people. I can talk at 400 words a minute, and I type at about 15 words per minute, and about a 50% error rate. So like it was just much more efficient to do all that stuff. And in doing the nutrition seminar, I had an outline that started off at maybe 15 pages, went to 40 pages. And what I wanted was material for people to read before they came to the seminar, so they would be better informed and have better questions. But you know, I could just hit more material faster. And eventually that thing got up to 120 pages that I was given out at the seminar, and a good friend of mine, Glenn Cordoza, he's been in the publishing scene a long time. I think he's a 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu black belt now, but he was like, dude, you should get this, you should publish this as a diet book. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. And he told me what the numbers were necessary for making New York Times bestseller list. And I just kind of back of the envelope, I'm like, man, I get a fair amount of traffic. Like I get all these blog posts, comments, and like the downloads on the website. I'm like, I think we could probably make a run of that. And so I committed to writing the first book, The Paleo Solution. But to the degree that book was good was mainly because that book is a conversation with tens of thousands of people. That wasn't me sitting down and writing a book in isolation. Had I just written a theoretical book, which no knock on Lauren Cordain, but he's never been a clinician at all. And so his stuff is like 100% theory-based. And he's tried to bring in people who have clinical experience. And I think that definitely has helped. But that's a major distinction between him and myself, is that I am a clinician. I have been a clinician. Like I made my living by having people come through the door and pay me to work on their nutrition and help them on their physical training. And like that just brings a totally different, end process to the story. Like I have a lot of theory involved with my work, but it's kind of like, okay, well, practical application, what does that actually look like, and how good of results can I get for people? But yeah, I mean, that was kind of like, again, the long arc of this whole process. And the Paleo Solution was a pretty good book. Like I look back at it now and I'm like, damn, that was a pretty, like I had some funny stuff in there. Like the chapter title for vitamin D was something like it should be 34 double D, it's that important or something, and there's a bunch of shit now that I would get canceled for, if I had it in there. I think I had a illustrator do the sign language for bullshit as one of the things in there and stuff like that. It was really fun. Like it was super cool. But all of that stuff, like the bullshit sign and everything, I learned from a woman who is deaf and communicates via sign language. And she was like, you need to put that in your seminar at some point. And so there was all this really cool shit that mainly was a response of interacting with people and really trying to help them, like being super committed to helping these folks and trying to have some fun along the way and making it interesting and maybe a little bit edgy here and there. But I guess the thing that I would throw out there is that to the degree I've had success, and somebody might look at, oh, Robb's got some good reach, he's done some cool stuff. I've just answered so many questions. I mean, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of questions between blogs, social media, email. On Instagram reached a point where it was so toxic that I really decoupled from that. But there was a period of probably 3 years where the back end, where you get like the private or the general messages and then the personal messages or whatever, I spent 2 hours a day just answering those. And I didn't get paid a dime. Like I did, and part of the reason why is I was really committed to helping people. And also that is where I learn new things. Like people will, hey, did you read this Ray Peat article? And stuff like that, because you get a couple of 100,000 people that are looking at things. And then if they're following my work, they're going to end up knowing 95% of what I know pretty quickly. They read the books, they follow the podcast. So then the additional 5% doesn't really matter. But if they find something new, like, hey, Robb, have you checked this out? It's like, no, I haven't. Like, I'll go deep on this thing. So continuing to help people, and like that was my job. Like it was kind of like, your lunchbox and your hard hat, and you went and sat down and you just fucking sat down and did work. And I tried to help people. And that's how to the degree I've had some success at reaching this space, has been reaching out to people and helping them. And then developing products. Like I had the Keto Masterclass, and we have like the Healthy Rebellion community and stuff like that. But I still, if somebody asks a question, like I do the best job I can to answer it. And then if it's super complex or whatever, I'm like, hey man, I've got this $20 thing over here that will answer it. And if you don't like it, I'll give you a refund. And so I do monetize this stuff, but I try to have some channels where I mainly help people. A lot of times people are like, I already knew everything I needed to know, but you helped me so much, I felt like an asshole for not buying something from you. So they'll go buy stuff just because I helped them,
Yeah. Rob, when you think back to the version of yourself in 2010 that wrote the Paleo Solution, are there just any big differences now in terms of like the lens that you view nutrition over 12 years since?
It's funny. I'm a lot less combative and prickly now than I was then. And I think some of that was, this is going to sound crazy. This is going to sound a little bit like narcissistic personality, but I'll throw it out there and folks can go where they want to with it. But there was a long period of time where I would meet somebody and they would, and just in the process of talking to them, they're like, oh, I have this, or I have this thing going on. And again, when you look at what folks have happening from a health perspective, it's either metabolically driven, like insulin resistance, or autoimmune. Everything, like virtually everything, and sometimes combinations, which is where it gets really, really complex. But I would encounter these folks that, and I mean, I was so sick, I was contemplating suicide, at some point. I would meet people, I'm like, I can help this person. And then you have to figure out, how can you help this person and not come across as such a weirdo that they go running away from you, and rightfully so. But in 2009, 2010, there was no Sean Baker advocating, like a stud athlete who's got this decorated military background as an orthopedic surgeon and also champions the carnivore diet. He didn't exist. Like there was almost nobody in this space at that time. And that was 10 years into fighting this fight, and I had this weird anxiety about like if I die, there's going to be a bunch of people who die because they never learn that their autoimmune condition could be put in remission, that that their type 2 diabetes can be dealt with, that there's a way better way of dealing with their type 1 diabetic kid than what they're being told, And so I was pretty prickly and combative at that time, like like really giving it to the vegans out there, and like John McDougall and some of the vegan doctors. So I was definitely way more combative, way more just itching for a fight and to get people into these like debates and kind of curb stomp them and everything. And I don't know if it's getting old or getting a little bit more empathy. And part of it too is just that, like, if I died now, the autoimmune paleo concept, the cat's out of the bag. Like, it's not dying, it's not going away. We have like 15 or 20 research articles on it now, and it's gonna go and develop. Just the other day, Diabetes UK posted that type 2 diabetes has a window of reversal, and the three options are low carb diet, very low carb diet, and bariatric surgery. And a diet and exercise was the fourth one, or aggressive strength training, which I'm like, my job's done. Like, the job isn't done. We still have a long ways to go, but at least as like 20 years ago, suggesting low carb diet, very low carb diet, or exercise as primary interventions against type 2 diabetes, you're a laughing stock, suggesting that I still have a screen capture from 2003, 2004, where I was poking around on PubMed and I put intestinal permeability into PubMed. There were only like 200 citations, and almost all of them with fraud, quackery, scam, not true. Like there were people like intestinal permeability is absolutely pseudoscience, and intestinal permeability is so well established now. It is linked to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. The transition from HIV turning into AIDS appears to be some sort of breakdown in intestinal barrier function. Don't know if it's causative or responsive to that, but it fucking happens, and that's part of what this process is. So something that was super controversial, especially within like the evidence-based medicine, evidence-based nutrition folks. Lane Norton talks about gut microbiota and gut health a lot now. They didn't 10 years ago, I mean, it was still kind of verboten because there wasn't enough data. It was still really speculative. So I just felt this really profound sense of anxiety that there were people that needed help, that could get help, and that they weren't going to experience the help if I didn't fight to get this stuff out there. And I still think there's a lot of work. In some way, there's more work to be done than ever, because now we're in this censorship cancel culture world in which, you know, me recommending a low carb diet and that animal products are not, in fact, the production of animal products are not the primary driver of climate change and may actually be a solution to climate change, which is the sacred cow thing.
Yes.
Fact checked, false, wrong. Like in 2018, my robbwolf.com website, we lost 97% of our site traffic overnight, which also means 97% of the income overnight, because Google had this thing called the OWL update, and alternative medicine, and in particular low carb websites, just had all of their backlinks trimmed such that it was impossible to find anything that I had done. So the day before this, if you put into a search engine type 1 diabetes CrossFit, 3 of my articles would have been on the first page of the first 10 results. What the Health, you know, the vegan documentary movie. I did a review of that. And so it was usually, if you put What the Health into a search engine, you'd find the main website, you'd find the IMBD website. And then my review was like number 3. All of that was gone. And so we're now in this censorship period where even if I produce the best information in the world, pharmaceutical companies in collusion with the government, in collusion with social media, are in a position to make my work disappear, which is why going on, that's kind of the only where there's little direct censorship of that material, like trying to post it on social media and whatnot can still flag different censorship algorithms. But it's interesting that I went from a spot of just being anxious that nobody would know about this stuff to a spot where, like, okay, we're starting to get somewhere, to now it's like, oh shit, they're liable to stuff all this stuff back into the genie back into the bottle via censorship. So it's been kind of a fascinating long arc, and I don't have a whole lot of fight left in me. So I'm glad that there's younger piss and vinegar people to come in and do this stuff, because there's still a lot of work to be done. I kind of thought that we had won a lot of things, and then around 2012, it was kind of into 2012, 2013. Is it that early? Yeah, I guess it was. There was a article that appeared on physics.org, the online journal for physics topics. And they had a piece that was talking about the methane emissions from shellfish. And people are concerned about methane emissions because methane is a pretty potent greenhouse gas. And this is one of the things that people get upset about cows, because cows eat grass, and part of the cellulosic fermentation of converting grass into cow is that there's methane released. Well, we're finding things like termites produce ungodly amounts of methane, and shellfish. And what was interesting is in the physics.org piece about this, there were scientists asking the question, well, does this mean that we should go out and eradicate shellfish to prevent climate change? And I was like, you guys are fucking idiots, so part of this, and this is maybe a show for a different time, but biogenic methane and carbon sources, the carbon that is the center of that methane molecule was a carbon molecule in a blade of grass that got its carbon out of the atmosphere, and then it was eaten by a cow, and then it was released as either methane or carbon. It's part of a cycle. And biogenic sources need to really be looked at very differently than what comes out of the tailpipe of a car. And also there's all these other knock-on things, like a well-managed pasture area, there's bird species and water capture and reducing desertification. There's all these other knock-on benefits in addition to the fact that the methane that is part of that cycle is just part of the carbon cycle. Like that methane will get cleaved into carbon dioxide and water at some point. That water will be part of the water cycle. The carbon will be part of the carbon cycle, and it really needs to get accounted for differently. Okay, so that's kind of the background story with that. But I posted some on Facebook. This is why we need a really nuanced discussion around climate change. And one of my friends, I had known this person 10 years at this point. I acknowledged her in my first book, in the acknowledgement. You know, she helped me edit the first book.
Mm-hmm.
She said, "What do you mean that we need a nuanced discussion around climate change?" I'm like, well, the label claims about all the severity and everything we need to be concerned about are wrong. Like, you know, this article is suggesting that shellfish need to be eradicated so that we can save the planet. And this is completely wrong. And she was like, well, I don't know about that specifically, but what I will tell you is the people that I've seen who push back on climate change in any way are usually also Holocaust deniers. Now, she's Jewish. Known she's Jewish for a long time. I'm super tight with the, you know, different elements of the Jewish community. Like, I have some friends that live in Israel that are into capoeira and jiu-jitsu and stuff like that, like very sensitive to their situation and plight. And I just couldn't believe that this person who's known me for 10 years, that is a personal friend, would go from that to where she went. And this again was like 2014. This was super early cancel culture. Like, I've been early on everything, you know, like somebody using this I don't agree with you, so you're a bigot card. Like, right. I got that in 2014. I was talking about fucking shellfish, you know, and so this is the stuff that I'm really kind of nervous about at this point is we need to be sensitive about our differences. We need to be very sensitive and proactive about different injustices and inequalities. But it's turned into a game of, if I don't agree with what you're up to, I'm going to paint you, cancel you, and we're done. And this is what is crazy to me is I've warned people that this will be used around climate change topics. This will be used around food topics. And I know a lot of people are very active, kind of social justice-y warrior type stuff in the autoimmune paleo scene, and that's all fine. But what they don't get is that those folks advocate for basically a meat-based diet. And they are not going to be able to advocate for a meat-based diet because climate change, COVID, and bigotry have all been woven together. Like in this really fascinating word salad, if you go to like the World Economic Forum website and look, like it's literally this kind of Aspergery word salad, you know, where the three topics are just used interchangeably. It doesn't even matter which one you use. Like it's assumed that they're all the same thing. And folks are going to find themselves who are maybe like big advocates of a animal-based diet, and maybe they're even fans of regenerative ag, but they're going to find that advocating for that is going to be impossible because it's been painted as a bigoted, you know, your disproportionate benefit, you know, all that type of stuff, you know, oh, you can only eat that way because you know, you're the lucky one. Well, okay, maybe I am. I would like to work towards a world where everybody has access to this. Yeah. And it's only that way if we don't let people like Bill Gates convince us that, you know, fake meat is the way that we should be going, that that's actually a sustainable gig. So again, fuck, I give long answers on these things, but that's been, you know, 10 years ago, I was very anxious about just getting this message out. I'm not so prickly now in general, but I am really concerned about this weird intersection of cancel culture and an inability to just have a discussion about something. Maybe I'm totally full of shit about this notion of shellfish not really being this problem, you know, with regards to climate change. Maybe I'm wrong. I would go out on a limb and say that a well-reasoned argument and some data would actually change my mind, whereas calling me a bigot is unlikely to do so. Like, it's probably just going to piss me off and like make me dig in my heels and entrench myself. And that's just, I've seen a ton of that in and around this health space, which has been fascinating and honestly a little bit terrifying, because whenever you look at history, folks always think that they will be the one that the folks don't knock on their door to change what they've got going on. They're like, it never happens that way. Like the people who are the brown shirts early are the first ones to go. Like history always shows that. And I'm just fascinated that folks are so quick to sign up on this these cancel culture topics, and particularly when we've fought the last 20 years to get to a spot where we could talk about a carnivore diet being really efficacious for an otherwise intractable gastrointestinal issue that could leave you either getting major surgery such that like your intestinal contents are being received in a bag outside your body.
Yep.
Or you're on immunosuppressant drugs, or you die. Like those are your options, you know? And we have a really viable solution that means a lifetime of health and success, you know? And the only downside is that like, there's maybe a small number of foods that we have to avoid and you know, do some stress mitigation around it. And all of that is in danger of going away, you know, because we can't have a conversation around this stuff. Like the social media, which has become this main area of sharing notes, like the curation of what's true has become really dangerous in my opinion.
Yeah, you see it online all the time. This like one way, you know, it's like one way of thinking, and there's like tons of suppression around a lot of these like fringe conversations. And you've been at the back end of a lot of that. We recently had Gary Fedke on. He was talking about his experience. I mean, you hear that story and it's genuinely sad because he's sitting there on one hand amputating people's limbs, and on the other hand creating solutions. And the political climate, like you talk about climate change, I'm thinking about climate change in a political sense too. Like we need to change the climate of our politics. We need to be able to think and have conversations again together and talk about these topics in a way where we're actually making progress. And back to Gary Fedke, it's like he's creating solutions for people, and he's getting put in front of the medical boards in Australia because he's prescribing a diet that these people just don't agree with for whatever reason. And it's genuinely concerning, especially when you talk about, you know, what you're talking about with the oysters or shellfish. That made me think of a comment that Pat Brown had, who's the CEO of Beyond, so he talked about if he could snap his fingers, this was in Vinnie Tortorich's documentary, if he could snap his fingers, he would eliminate all the cows from the face of the earth.
Right.
I think that's one of the least informed. If that's nefarious, like if he knows the science and is saying that, that's really concerning. But if that's just negligence or like just not knowing the science, that to me is like a case in point as to like why we need to be able to have these conversations. Like cows are actually doing amazing things to the environment that people just aren't talking about. And like your work in Sacred Cow speaks to that.
There are tens of millions of women who steward over tens of millions of children in the world who, because of their socio-political situation, it's illegal for them to own land. It's illegal for them to own physical property other than livestock. And for tens of millions of women, if he had been able to snap his fingers Thanos style and dictate his fucked up narcissistic, view of the world, all of those women, all of those children, all of those social connectivity nodes would disappear. That is the only way they can support themselves economically. That is the only way they support themselves, nutritionally, and on and on and on. And this is the ignorant, and it doesn't even factor into, well-managed livestock. What does that mean for the environment? Well, it's actually a net win. Like we have great examples of reversing desertification with properly managed livestock. You can overgraze an area, you can undergraze an area. And then when you re-emulate the predator-prey interaction that animals had pre-human intervention of destroying the predator, the large predator base, these large grazing animals are amazing, and 2/3 of the Earth's landmass are grasslands. They are amenable for nothing other than growing grass and growing ruminants on that grass. And this asshole is going to say that if he had a Thanos-esque wish, he would make all those animals go away. And it's like, And you know, it's even explaining the social connection and social implications of like women in developing countries owning livestock as their primary means of self-stewardship. There's a lot to unpack with that. Usually when people learn about that, and interestingly, they're usually kind of a little more left-leaning, a little more progressive, like, oh, well, that's a big deal. This is a women's rights issue. And it's like, goddamn straight it is, you know, yeah. That's a lot to unpack. Whereas it's super easy to say meat causes cancer, meat destroys the environment, and you're an asshole and irresponsible if you consume meat. That's all super soundbitey and it feels good. You get to, you know, do your team politics and everything. And the actual reality is a way different story. You know, there's a lot more that's going on with it. You can have super poorly managed grasslands. You can have animals that are not well treated. Like there's all kinds of problems with conventional approaches to animal husbandry. And there's all kinds of potential upsides if you just tweak those things a little bit. Even conventional, you know, your Walmart beef that you buy, it spent 70 to 80% of its life on grass. There's a good chance that most of the land that those animals were on was actually regeneratively managed. It's only the final stage of feedlot finishing that there's maybe some question there. And even that, as Diana and I wrote Sacred Cow, we're like, well, shit, a bunch of what goes into that is crop residues. Like after a crop has been harvested, they put the animals in to eat all the leftovers in the field, which then the cows pee and poo and renutrify the soil and do all that stuff. And then there's all these leftover byproducts of like industrial ethanol production, where they've got the mash that's left over after that they feed to these animals. It's not technically pasture, but it's a great way to upcycle nutrients. So for the meat elitists, it's not grass finished, pasture finished, but systems approach, it's like, well, we're producing massive amounts of ethanol, whether it's used for fuel or whether it's used to make beer or wine or, you know, hard liquor or whatever. You're either going to compost that stuff and not get any nutritional value and still release greenhouse gases, or you can feed it to animals and get all this nutrient upcycling with it. But it doesn't fit nicely into one bucket. It's not it's not the perfectly regenerative if the only thing that you believe in is grass finishing. If you want a grass finish, that's great. But if you have a local brewery or distillery and they've got a bunch of mash that they're paying to landfill, you might be like, hey man, I'll take that off your hands and I'll feed it to my pigs and sheep and goats. And then though we have to change our mindset, it's like, is that regenerative? Well, yes, if you do it properly.
That was one of my favorite chapters in the entire book, because I think that really spoke to the place of truth that you and Diana were coming from. Because I remember I was listening to it in an audiobook and it was really powerful, because I think the words were, you said, you were like, look, we wish that we could sit here and say that nutritionally grass finished is so much more superior than grain finished, but it's just not. The data doesn't show that. And I was like, if you weren't coming from a source of truth, because there's so many people that just will blanket push grass-fed, grass finish, and it turns people off that maybe can't afford that, or they need to go to Walmart, but they feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't eat the meat from Walmart because it's poor quality, because that's what people are telling me on social media. So you're just spelling all that misinformation. And
there's all these, like, especially right now, like the economy is poised to go in the absolute shitter. Yeah. And we're telling, so you've got, let's say, a young family, it's a husband and wife, they're just getting their life going, they're working their way up their career path. They've got two little kids. Maybe both the parents and the kids have had different health problems, and then they come in kissing contact with some sort of meat-based approach. And then they get assailed with, well, you're an asshole if you eat animal products. It's unethical. You're going to give your kids cancer. You're going to give yourself cancer. And oh, by the way, you're destroying the planet. Oh, and really, oh, by the way, if everything you eat isn't 100% grass finished, then you're a jerk and a horrible person. And it's just not true at all. Like the best thing that those folks could do is just get the 80% ground beef that's $4.99 at Walmart and buy it in 20-pound sleeves and then work that into all that. Like if they're making some macaroni and cheese for the kids, then you cook some of that meat and you put it in the mac and cheese, and the kids are like, damn, this is good, because it is. And they're feeding their kids great, and they're not making perfection the antithesis of good enough. You know, it's you know, what's funny in all this story is we've had no organized pushback from the vegans at all about Sacred Cow, nothing, which we fully expected that. I think we did such a good job on the book and film that they actually don't want people to even look at it, because it's actually really, we laid out a really good case. We spent 4 years doing the book and the film. Like we really took our time doing it, and we did a damn good job. It's the thing I'm the most proud of any project that I've worked on in my life. We did a really good job with that. But the people who have pushed back hard are the meat elitists. They're usually white women who are somewhat peripherally associated with ownership of a regenerative ranch. And they get a red ass about us saying that taking the mash that's left over from beer production and feeding it to your animals is just fine, and it's not going to alter the nutritional value in a negative way. Those people have given us absolute hell online, really? And it's fascinating. Yeah.
It's so interesting looking at the food system and nutrition. We try to look at it through two lenses: real food and then junk food, or junk products, however you want to call it. And there's a lot of conversations within real food that are just like, in terms of shifting the health of society. If we got people off of, like, the biggest issue is getting people from junk food to real food.
Right.
If that happens, we will be infinitely healthier. The medical system will benefit, because there will be fewer patients who need to be dealing with all the chronic diseases and autoimmune issues. But then there's all these topics within real food that are now, people who are very well informed on all these topics are debating about, which I think speaks to your point on like grass-fed, grain finish. It's like there's a few other topics that, like GMOs, non-GMO, that I think people are just genuinely curious about, that you've spoken to. And I think that those are like the more advanced topics maybe, but at the same time, there's still so many people dealing with this, like, junk food, still eating junk food. So
right.
It's such a healthy balance of like, where do we like create a road forward to like get people healthier? And like we talk about this all the time, there needs to be like these bridge products or bridge ideas, conversations to get people off of real food, to quit junk food. You have an amazing YouTube video on quitting junk food, which I would be curious to get your take on. But just getting people over and eating real foods is something we talk about all the time. It's just the simplest message possible out there is just eat real foods.
Yeah. And it does get a little bit tricky. It's funny because people will, I like Spencer Nadolsky, but he kind of gives me a red ass sometimes. But he was saying, well, technically whey protein is a processed food. I'm like, okay, doc, yeah, you win. You got that one. But it's so different than like a bag of Doritos. It's like, is whey protein inherently a hyperpalatable food? Like, could I put together a whey protein shake with like peanut butter, sugar, and this and that, and make it like taste so good that it would be hard to stop drinking it? Yeah, but like it takes some effort to do that. Whereas like a bag of Doritos, like right now, you can imagine what the bag sounds like before it's opened, and then you rip it open, and we all like that corn plus cheese. I can smell it right now. My mouth is starting to water off of it, and I'm probably releasing insulin because it's so fucking hardwired in there, and that's what we're really fighting. And so pushing back against mainly processed foods, like doing this thing that he did one day, was going on and on and on about like, well, whey protein is actually a processed food too. It's like, well, what the fuck are you trying to say? Like, what is your point? Like, we've got to create some boundaries somewhere. Brett Weinstein and Heather Hying of the Dark Horse podcast, they talked about this, like in categorizing organisms biologically, there are imperfect boundaries. If we're talking about cats, it's like, house cats? Well, there are these things that are Bengals, which we own one, that was a crossbreed of an African wildcat and a domestic cat. And if it's 5 generations in, it's still tech. Is that a perfect boundary? No, but it's still a cat. Like we could all agree that it's a cat. Is it a wildcat or not? Well, okay. Does it even matter at that point? You know, and what I find is that people love, and you know, it's kind of the shystery salespeople love taking those edgy distinctions and turning them into a whole world. Like the whole world exists on this razor's edge. And it's like, no, that's the thing that cuts these things apart and makes them separate categories. That is not where we live our whole life, is on the razor's edge of the distinction between whole foods versus junk foods, you know? And it's like, is jerky a junk food? I don't think so. Well, it's got sugar in it. Yeah. Does it have that much sugar? No, not really. Even the really sugary stuff. And are you prone to overeat jerky, even if it's got a lot of sugar, even if it's got a lot of salt? I love jerky. I can eat a fair amount of jerky, but I'm not going to eat even my protein allotment of jerky in a sitting. I get about 10, 15 grams of protein from jerky, and I'm like, I'm good. That's enough salt. That's enough sugar. I'm good on this. It's like trying to get my protein allotment from like hot dogs. I like hot dogs, but I'm not going to eat 50 grams of protein from hot dogs. It's just not going to happen. You know, there's too much salt, and I love salt. I have a company that sells salt, you know, but it's and so it's like, are these the things that you need to really get fired up about? And I think that this is where focusing on whole foods is good. I do think that putting in the distinction of like hyper palatable foods is a good one, because it's like, okay, whey protein's technically processed. So Spencer, you went on that, and hot dog, okay, whatever. But are any of these things hyper palatable? I wouldn't really say they are, but like Doritos, I would say as a baseline are hyper palatable. And then they have this product called Doritos Roulette, which is in the bag. So they're spicier than the normal Doritos, but it follows a power law where very few in the bag, there are a few in number, but extremely hot in taste chips. Then there's a middle ground, and then there's the chips that are kind of modestly hot. When I saw this thing, I'm like, this is genius. This is, it's been engineered to bypass the neuroregulation of appetite. And I actually wrote to, I think it's Unilever that produces these things. I'm like, hey, do your chips follow a power law distribution? You know, didn't expect to ever hear back from them. And like 2 days later, I got this email from this very nice woman, and she was like, hey, the scientists here in the lab love your work. Like they loved Wired to Eat and everything. And so the people who are engineering the food that bypasses the neuroregulation of appetite are super well versed on this stuff, you know?
Oh man.
And she said, yeah, it follows a power law. They were super impressed that you picked up on that. But what they've done is they've got a food that already tastes really good. And now in one bag, there's actually multiple flavor experiences, and it's randomized. If you wanted to get any organism addicted to cocaine, you wouldn't give them just super high doses in you know, like a pill or let's say water, like they do that with mice. The way you get mice really quickly addicted to cocaine is they randomize high, medium, and low doses, because then you've got the anticipatory element. Is the next one the big one? Is the next one the big one? And that anticipatory piece so dramatically heightens the addictive process. It's kind of like when people who've done different types of hard drugs, when they're opening their heroin kit and they're like getting the spoon out and their fire source and everything. That anticipatory part is so much of what makes that process addictive. And we've built that into our food system. So I think like directing people towards whole foods, and then having, you know, whole versus junk foods is a great place to start. And then an easy layer of refinement is hyperpalatable foods, because we can define that, like, what foods for you can you not say no to? And those are different from person to person. You know, like I'm not really a sweets kind of guy. Like there's some sweet stuff I like. I have never met a plate of nachos that I didn't like. I have never met a plate of nachos that I wouldn't push an old woman down in the street to take hers and eat it, you know? So I'm a salty, crunchy guy. There is no off switch for me with salty, crunchy foods. So that's my hyper palatable conundrum. I can't have salty, crunchy foods in the house. Like that's just all there is to it. So I think that that's a really helpful next layer to introduce. And it's what I like about it is it's both helpful clinically in helping folks to change behavior, but it's also very consistent with the science. Like if you want to be like super evidence-based, here's your randomized trial and everything, it's like, okay, this fits within that too, because we know that complex combinations of hyperpalatable foods lead to increased total caloric consumption. So we tick our kind of Lane Norton-esque box, but on that side, but then we've also got a very actionable clinical piece to be able to help people. It's like, you know what your trigger foods are.
Yes.
We need to stay clear of those. But like, you probably won't be, I can't portion control nachos. The only way I portion control nachos is if I'm locked in a cage and somebody opens it and slides, you know, a meager bowl of that stuff in. And I swear to God, if I can get their arm and drag them through that hole, I'll eat them with nachos, you know? So yeah.
Rob, how do you think about like almost balancing your perspective as a dad that has this such a unique lens into nutrition and wanting your daughters to eat as healthy as possible, but also be a kid? Because I feel like there's probably a lot of parents that fall into this animal-based rabbit hole where they don't really know what to do necessarily with their own kids nutritionally.
Yeah, I don't know what to do. Like we're figuring it out as we go. We communicate a lot with our kids. It's interesting, like the older kid definitely takes more after Nikki. Like she seems to be more metabolically flexible, and she'll eat some carby foods and she's fine. Like she doesn't auger into a mountainside. Our younger one, Sagan, she's way more like me. And if she doesn't eat well, if she doesn't eat consistently, if she eats the wrong stuff, she'll end up in a hypoglycemic rut. And dude, it is horrible. She would shiv you in the liver and burn the world down and not think twice about it. And she's only 8, and so we're working through that. But what I'm doing with both kids, so we don't really limit access to anything. So we have some ice cream on hand, and I have both like Rebel ice cream, which is keto, with some more conventional ice cream. We have some Lily's chocolate, and then we have some regular chocolate. The more easily regulated stuff I allow 100% access to. So like the Rebel ice cream, the Lily's chocolate and everything, that stuff's super easy access. I let as much of that anytime you want, because what's interesting is my kids really like the Lily's chocolate, but they'll go eat it and then they're done. Like they don't eat a whole bar. Whereas at Halloween, they will get a bag of candy and they start doing like some Hershey's and things, these chocolates that are way sweeter. There's no off switch for them. And what I've done is I talk to them. I'm like, do you feel good after you've had this bender on this stuff? And they're like, no, I don't. I'm like, okay, what do we want to do about that? Well, you know, we'll discuss it. I'm like, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we have like one of these small Hershey's and you save that for when you really want to kick your heels up. And then we've got 5 bars of different Lily's and you can have that anytime you want. They're like, okay, that's cool. I'm really trying to get them in a spot where they are self-regulating. But, you know, like Sagan told me the other day, she's like, Dad, when you and Mom are gone, I get up on the counter and I scoop cake frosting out of the container. I'm like, that's okay. I did that as a kid, you know, and so I don't guilt her. I don't, and also what surprised her is I took the cake frosting. I'm like, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put it on the bottom shelf because I'm worried about you climbing up on the counter and falling off while we're gone. I don't want you to get hurt. So this thing's on the lower shelf. Just be careful when you do this. So what I didn't do was I didn't guilt her. I actually, she knew I loved her because I'm like, hey, what I'm concerned about is you falling off the counter. Yeah, if you eat too much of this, it's going to give you a bellyache and you're going to be crazy, right? And she's like, yes. I'm like, okay, so let's just not do that. So we acknowledge that there is a problem there if she overeats it, but I'm taking it from a dangerous place in the kitchen to a less dangerous place. I'm actually making it easier for her. So instead of her laying in bed and thinking about, ooh, I'm going to climb up on the counter and I'm doing something naughty, now it's at eye level with her. She can open it. She can get it anytime she wants. And what I find is maybe once a week, she'll go in and she'll get it. And I'm like, hey, use a spoon too. Your fingers are dirty. She's like, okay, that's cool. And so instead of emotionalizing this thing, and so far so good, she's been okay with it. You know, it could have maybe gone disastrous where I go back in there and she's eaten the whole container and then she's throwing up afterwards. So I mean, there's always situations where it goes sideways. But what I've tried to do is really communicate about consequences. Like, you can eat anything you want, but both of my girls are at like 99th percentile on height. And Nikki and I are just average height for male and female, but both of us have a lot of height in our families. But like Zoe is 10 years old and she's 5'1". Like she's giant, and they've eaten really well. Like they eat a lot of protein, that, you know, nutrient-dense foods and everything. Sagan only looks small because she's 2.5 years younger, but in her jiu-jitsu class, all the kids are a year older than her, but Sagan is literally like a head taller than every kid in her jiu-jitsu class. It's kind of like, geez, man. So we generally try to feed them well. We generally, when we talk about this stuff, we talk about consequences. I talk about the fact that we work with people who have complex health problems, and eating better is good. We mentioned that they don't have grandmothers because their grandmothers died from health issues from poor diet. We're like, so you didn't get to meet Grandma Mary and Grandma Candy because they died. And you know, we work with people trying to avoid this stuff all the time. So we talk about some consequences, but then, you know, like that deal with the cake frosting, I think that could have turned into a shit show if I was like, you can't have this, and, you know, I'm going to hide it. And then there's this cat and mouse kind of thing. I don't want to compete with my kid in a spy versus spy game. Like, I'm going to lose that, you know, and all I'm doing is eroding trust. But she really trusts me now, and I made it safer. And I hope that I de-emotionalize it. And part of what I said too is I was like, hey, if you're going to have a lot of this, just grab some salami or something before or afterwards, so you have a little protein to balance it out. Okay, can you do that? And she's like, yeah. And I think they do. Like, I don't tightly monitor it and all that type of stuff, but that's how I've navigated things so far. I know some people like the Emmerichs, I think their kids are totally ketoed out and stuff like that, and that's great. I didn't really feel comfortable forcing that on my kids. Sagan actually might benefit from it, like she might actually overall feel better doing that, but I'm just not comfortable doing that. I just try to push good food options. We try to provide a spectrum of options, and then I really try to make them aware of consequences. And even at 8 and 10, I tell them, it's only eight more years that you guys are going to have me in your ear, and then you are on your own. And what I'm trying to get you to do is to understand that there's consequences to every decision, and you are going to be the only person that you can blame or thank for those decisions. And so that's kind of the direction that we've done. And I don't know, man, maybe they end up writing some tell-all story about what a horrible parent I am, or maybe it ends up working out well. I don't know. It's different. Between the two kids, even though they're in theory from same biological stock, they're shockingly different, you know. So like, you kind of need a different management tool to some degree with both of them, other than I just remind them of consequences and I try to sell upsides, you know. Yeah,
it's such a great approach, and I feel like kind of just giving them the personal autonomy to learn how to make a decision for themselves and understand consequences of it just by giving them the information is probably not what most parents would do. I know, like, most parents are probably just saying no and not giving much context behind it, but I feel like giving them some of the information is such a great approach to them just learning all these different things about food.
Yeah, so here's the thing that I do a hard no on is devices. Like, we are super limited in the amount of device time that they get. We've let them do some Minecraft. Only recently have they been able to get into a networked game environment, and it's because they have been doing some OutSchool, which is this online kind of school course, and they're actually learning like some math and some history as part of this thing, which is part of the way that they weaseled us into this thing. You know, they're like, hey, we learn math and reading and stuff too. And I'm like, you little bastards. But but both kids turn into assholes when they've been on devices. And I will say as much. I'm like, you two are assholes today because you've been on devices. You no more for a week. And what I tell them is, if you're going to be on your device and then we ask you to do something, you need to be able to control your own shit enough. This is kind of, I don't know if you guys are into Dune, but like the the Dom Jabbar, where it's like he puts his hand in the pain box, and it like if you're an animal, you yank the hand out and you just react. And if you are a reactionary person, you have no control over your life. The world will control you. The world has you by the short hairs. And I just, if there's one thing that I will not let my kids leave our house is being in a position where the world can manipulate them by playing off their emotions. Like by hook or by crook, I'm going to do my best to not have that happen. And so part of this is that I will tell them, you've been a jerk after you were on your device. And they're like, yeah, I know. I'm like, okay, so the next time you get on there and then we ask you to clean your room or do this or do that, your answer is, okay, Dad, and a big grin on your face. And inside you can be like, fuck you, I hate you, old man. And you can say whatever you want to internally, but you need to sell me that you've got your shit together externally. And I talk to them largely the way I'm talking to you guys right now. Like I'm very, very direct with that. But I tell you what, they've been figuring it out. And if there is one thing, you know, like I look around the world and people, you know, if they don't get a pronoun proper or something like that, they're like, you know, crumble. My kids are not going to be that. They'll be respectful of other people, but I just want them to be resilient. Like I want them to, if you parachuted them into Siberia and you come back 5 years after that, they're in charge of that thing. They're running the whole operation and they are cool. They are squared away. Then I did my job as a parent. I don't have to be worried about them living or succeeding because they are adaptable and they understand consequences and all that type of stuff.
Are you you've done so much work across the food system. Where are you finding your optimism looking forward into the future?
Optimism. Funny. So a place I am finding optimism, I've made some friends with folks here in Montana. They own a bison ranch. And I've learned a lot about that part of the food system. And a major choke point, and it became obvious during COVID, is butchering and processing. Because of FDA regulations, most meat needs to go to these FDA certified facilities. There's a massive choke point, like in military engagements, you love choke points. Like if you can get a mass of people and you've got high ground, you win. And choke points in processing are gnarly, and the big processors are set up such that they will buy all of the time for a processor. So like a small time operator, a guy who's got 100 cattle, 1,000 cattle, but pretty small time operator, they have nowhere to take their meat to be processed because the big operators just buy the facility to cock block any of the small operators from getting in there. So what we've been talking about is putting together kind of a small-time venture fund to produce these mobile abattoirs, these mobile butchering and processing. They're expensive, they're high risk, they're high liability, they're not super high profitability. Like somebody can make 100, 150 grand a year, like doing this full time. So it's not a terrible living, but it's very hard work. But we're looking at putting together a deal, kind of like the Mike Rowe, like Dirty Jobs kind of gig, subsidizing folks to get in, get the gear, get trained in how to do this, and then be able to buy it back from the parent organization over time, and then own that infrastructure. Because if things go sideways, we have food everywhere. But the problem is that we can't get it processed. Like what went sideways during COVID, where we had like meat shortages, it wasn't a shortage of meat. It just became impossible to get it moved through the processing, situation. So that is one area that is a lot of work and very unglamorous, but it's I feel like it's kind of an Achilles heel, both good and bad within the food system. Like I think that we could exploit it. It's such a ridiculous deal though, with the modern world of social media and blockchain and all this stuff. Most butcher shops and high-end restaurants are perfectly well suited for processing meat if they wanted to. Right. And what's interesting is each animal, it has an ear tag, it has a QR code that gets put into the blockchain. So like if that animal makes somebody sick, we have an irrefutable bit of documentation about how and where that all happened. So like a bunch of the legislation happened in like that post Upton Sinclair, the jungle, you know, where they were like canning rats in canned meat and stuff like that. Like, okay, for that time, some of the legislation around this made sense. It doesn't make sense anymore, so much of this stuff. Like, we could decentralize so much of our food production system, and it'd be a major source of revenue for like rural communities to be able to do that stuff more internally. Right now, people raise meat in different areas. They raise the cattle, and then they'll send it 1,000 miles away to get it processed. And it's like, how much carbon footprint is there on that? How much stress is there on the animals? How much opportunity is there for the animals to get sick coming and going and doing that versus processing most of that stuff locally? Right. So it's a lot of like archaic legislature and monopolistic activities on the part of big food, and also the federal government that has made this stuff very difficult. But like Congressman Massey had the Prime Act, which was a move to try to make it more amenable to process some amount of meat at more of a local level. You can't sell it interstate, but that shouldn't really be the goal. The goal shouldn't be to send meat across state lines. We should be eating more meat locally, you know? Yeah.
Rob, how has the response been from local ranchers that you've talked to about this concept?
They're excited. They are definitely excited, and particularly the newer generation of folks. The old guard, they kind of have their own way of doing things, and like if they've made money doing what they're doing, that's all well and good. But they're really excited, and it's obvious to everybody. It's like, this is an obvious choke point, and even to the old guard guys, it's like, do you like taking your Montana beef and sending it to Colorado for processing? Like, does that really make you feel good? Or would you rather have a local processor that you know and trust, and like you can look them in the eye or break their kneecaps if they do you wrong? Like, this is one of these things that I just don't get, where people love centralizing things at like the federal level and stuff like that. There's no accountability. Whereas if you have some local person that you can talk to or interact with, it's so much easier to get what you want and need out of that. And then again, like we've got, let's say the Flathead Valley here where I live, we have lots of meat that's raised around here. If we produced most of it locally, there would be remarkable infrastructure and jobs for all that stuff. Like there would be a couple of hundred people employed, you know, like 50 to 100 grand a year dealing with that stuff. That would be amazing. And instead, we've farmed it all out, and we've got all the carbon footprint and all the shipping and receiving costs have gone up 400% or 500% in a matter of like 6 months. You can't, as a business, you can't plan ahead for that stuff. As a family living at the margins, you can't plan ahead for that stuff. You know, it's just ridiculous. So if there's anything good that comes out of all of the chaos of COVID and all the rest of the stuff, I think it will so pressure test the systems that we're in. It's going to force us to adapt a more decentralized approach, you know, or we're going to centralize everything, and then it's all going to fail, and then it's going to be decentralized, but it's going to be more like Mad Max than you know, Star Wars. So
there's really like these two tides of centralization versus decentralization. Hopefully things can get built, as you're saying, on the decentralized side in a way that's not societally
ending.
It's
if we build the decentralization with intentionality, then society can decentralize, but in a stable, reasonable way. If society collapses, then our food systems will decentralize on the back end, and it's my neighbor is going to end up in my cook pot is the way that's going to work out. So
that's actually honestly part of the reason we got started. Was we were writing for a rancher he's a man in Texas who's come in contact with a bunch of these ranchers, and he started writing about the relationship between Bitcoin and beef, and how, you know, Bitcoin can be this tool to help kind of navigate some of the decentralization in the food system. And we started writing for him. So I think it really does, when you look at it, I feel like there's some very underlying principles to the benefits that would happen if we decentralize go back to a more localized food system, from the environmental perspective that you're talking about, from a nutritional perspective. There's just so many of these benefits that I think get often overlooked, but your work really does highlight like, I think Sacred Cow is one of those things that, you know, everyone needs to go get a copy and read it. Go listen to it on audiobook, because it spells all these things out that, you know, there's importance to having a food system that incorporates these amazing animals. So yeah, I think, you know, everything you've talked about today has just been incredibly valuable. So really appreciate you know, all the work that you've done and are doing.
Thank you, guys. Huge honor to have the opportunity to talk about this stuff. And, you know, maybe somewhat in closing, the greasy used car salesman pitch that I would throw out there for folks is, there was an interesting bit of commentary after Diana and I were on Joe Rogan, and this guy, it was really thoughtful, and he's like, hey, because there's a bunch of back and forth about like, oh, this is bullshit, this is that. He's like, nothing's 100% one way or the other, but let's be honest about this. These guys are talking about the global food system and climate change. If they are 95% wrong, but 5% right, that's massive. Like, we need to fix that. Like, it's huge. And he said, and I'll tell you what, the flip side is true. They're 95% right, maybe 5% wrong at best. And now what does that mean for the global food system, for climate change and how we're responding to it? And what was interesting is there was this tide that was going where it was like, hate. And then this guy, I forget who he was. I've got it kind of screen captured. But the whole sentiment shifted. Like, it was one of those rare times where the idiots on social media grokked the bigger story, or maybe some less idiotic tranche of people got in there, but they were like, God damn, wow, okay, so climate change is a big deal. And these guys can't be 100% wrong, but it's still, everything they're saying is contrary to what the mainstream is suggesting. So if that 5% is what we need to change, but if it's 95% off with what the mainstream is saying, we're fucked, you know, like we're totally screwed, and we really need to start turning the ship immediately. And so all I would throw out there to folks, whether you're bought in on this or you're talking to family members that are bought in on this, it's a super important topic. And if nothing else, if I'm the crazy that needs my mind change, you should really understand what I'm saying, so that you can articulate a good response and be able to change my mind. You know, because hopefully, if I am wrong, let's present me with some material and some facts so that I can change my mind and I can shift gears and have a different perspective. But if I happen to be right, and we look at the way that the world is pushing, like, we really need to modify some stuff, because from Bill Gates to the media, social media, government, everybody is saying one thing. And it's kind of ironic that this monoculture of thought is now somehow like this progressive idea. You know, these are all kind of 20 years ago, these were all the evil entities. You don't trust pharma, you don't trust billionaire tech nerds and the government. And now these are the sole source of arbiters of truth, really? Or, you know, so yeah, that's the only thing I'd throw out there is maybe Diana and I don't have it right, or maybe we've got it partially right, but at least kick the tires on it to see where the boundaries of like reality and disreality kind of maybe exist on this story.
And that's the amazing thing about creating a documentary, is you can send it to anyone and say, please just take an open mind, take an hour and a half, watch this film. I'm not going to tell you anything about it, but just let's talk afterwards and see how you think. Like, that's such a great point to actually lead to progress.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. At least open the door. Yeah.
Rob, really quick, what's the best way for people to connect with you if they want to learn more about the work that you're doing?
Probably robbwolf.com or sacredcow.info. Like, I kind of lurk around both locations.
Yeah, and just for listeners, sacredcow.info has amazing infographics if you're interested, or just coming across some of this information around cows and their role in the environment and nutritionally, how important they are. There's some basic infographics there and not so basic infographics that really help break that information down. So go check that out. Rob, this has been great. We've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I hope our viewers will get a ton out of this. So really appreciate it. Appreciate your time, and hopefully we get to talk again soon.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob.
Bye.